Okay, great. We go ahead.
Okay, so the presentation contents will be roughly divided in 4 chapters. First, some introduction about the context of the framework, then little more insight into the strategy and tools that were applied for completion of this tool and framework for holistic monitoring, and then implementation and validation on an actual operating in-service structure. Of course, at the end, some conclusion and outlook for future research. So it was difficult in these circumstances not to start the presentation with something related to our very unique events this year. So basically, if we think of monitoring systems as a sort of protective capsule or protective shield of our structures, the idea is to develop a sort of perfect immune system reaction. So we don't want a structure to have false positive alarms or be oversensitive to triggers which are just normal, harmless variation of the system or changing operational conditions, but the structure indeed is healthy. And we don't want at the same time false negative alarms, which will become camouflaged or hidden in all these data patterns due to the high sensitivity of their systems not being able to recognize actual damages. So something very similar to our own immune system, which is exposed continuously to different kinds of changes, and it's insufficient or overreactive response to these triggers. When we speak about data-driven modeling, what is the most important aspect, of course, it comes intuitively, is that we have to take care of the quality of the data, since it is directly related to the collected records of structural responses or environmental or operational parameters where the structure is operating. Hence, for data-driven models, it is important that they have most possible extended knowledge about the operating variability of the studied system and all these, let's say, input parameters that can change during the course of the serviceability or complete full lifetime of the structure. Having that in mind, it brings me to another analogy of, again, from the biology sector, which is, let's say, more connected to our own vision system. Indeed, our brain merges pictures or images from our both eyes to create one three-dimensional vision range, which enables a sort of depth perception. And this enables us to uncamouflage, for example, patterns in our visual images, which is very also convenient also for other predators, which have, let's say, this as a very important skill in their everyday life. So the idea is that this combination of both sources of visual images through our eyes enables a holistic diagnosis approach that enables the identification of these camouflage patterns. And finally, this concept brings me to the world of structures, where by combining this, on one hand side, structural responses, and on the other hand side, measured environmental data, operational data, and what is in essence connected to the variability of the structure in its natural habitat of functioning. Then by combining these two information, we provide a joint, let's say, 3D vision range image where we have a holistic approach in identifying the structural behavior. And this concept was introduced and validated for the Z24 bridge benchmark in 2014 from, I think the starting paper was from Professor Hadji and Minas Spiridonakos, also alumni, I think, from the department. And this sort of channeled the origins of this concept where combination of system outputs, but at the same time, information about the randomness and variability of the data of the environment where the structure operates is crucial in providing a holistic approach, one that will be able to decamouflage patterns when changes are originally connected to the environmental data and operational data variation or real actual damage of the system. So this brings me finally to the short overview of the strategy and tools that were applied. Since we are discussing output-only data-driven analysis, so having in mind the whole structural health monitoring concept, the focus is set on parametric modeling of the time series. And the idea is that we have no information about the simulation or the loading agents of the system. And of course, we are not able to measure the true or clear output of the system. Instead, we have this measured observation, which is disturbed with the unknown as well disturbances. So the idea is to fit the best model that will produce the best reproduction of the system response which we observe. And of course, this is most frequently done via some cost function introduced on the residual of between the true system output and the model system output. So this would be, of course, the focus. So the question is, what is the best model that can introduce this best fitness to the actual system response? The combination is of three models. So one is concerned with directly the response signals, which are fed as an input. And then the residual of the first model is fed as an output into a second model, where on the other hand side, we put inside information about measured input parameters, such as temperature variations, as well as wind maybe influences, depending on the structure, of course. And then the provided residual from this model is used as an input into a third model, where the output quantity is tracked in time. So this is basically the link between three different models. So now I will just quickly go over the three. So the first one is the time-varying ARMA model, which is, of course, a well-known non-stationary counterpart of the ARMA model. It gives, let's say, a modeling of a non-stationary output with a regressive form on its past realizations. And of course, what we are interested here is that or the most important aspect is that the unknown parameters of the model are described as well in function of time. So basically, this is how we introduce the time variability. Then, of course, we have the unmodeled part of the signal, or basically the innovations or the residual, which is a normally identically distributed, let's say, time history signal, which has a zero mean and time-varying variance. The subclass of the method which was used was the smoothness priors, which basically introduced another evolution constraint to the time-varying parameters of the model. So instead of letting them freely to evolve in time, this, in a sense, produces some stochastic constraints, and these are here explained with this set of equations. So the idea is that we control this set of parameters, which is the order of the TARMA model marked here, the kappa, or the order of the stochastic difference equations, and nu, which is the ratio of the residual variances of both models, which for convenience of calculations is taken as a constant in time. So after fitting, for example, this model and producing a certain output, the second one is the polynomial chaos expansion model, which is modeling or concerned about the uncertainty of the input data and how this propagates through the system. So basically, we introduce here another input which is directly related to the measured environmental and operational parameters of the system under investigation. And then the model produces this, let's say, residual again. This is a mathematical description of how this approach is handled with a sort of polynomial function, something like a Fourier-like, let's say, representation, where the idea is to determine the deterministic coefficients, as well as to carefully select the family of polynomial basis functions. One, let's say, theoretical regularity requirement for applying this method, which introduces a sort of difficulty when we talk about real data, is that it requires that the data are statistically independent. And this means that a sort of pre-processing is required in order to obtain this. Hence, I mentioned here that we applied the independent component analysis tools, which has this capability of providing statistically dependent input data into independent, however, with the disadvantage that it loses the physical representation of the obtained values. So these are sort of some latent variables which are obtained from the big data cloud. Another thing which is important is, as I mentioned, to carefully select the polynomial basis function, which should be directly related to this probability density functions of the input variables. So basically, it needs to be similar to a weighting function according to the ASCII scheme to obtain the orthonormality, let's say, function, not function, but characteristic of this polynomial. So for example, for uniformly distributed input variables, a sort of a family of so-called Legendre polynomials should be selected because according to this, let's say, orthonormality criteria, this type of combination of probability density function together with uniform distributions enables the orthonormal regularity requirement of the polynomial chaos expansion model. So the controlled parameter accepts the selection of the right or best polynomial basis function is the maximum polynomial order as well. This directly has an effect on the computational time, of course, of the method, because the higher it goes, of course, it has a bigger number of coefficients that needs to be estimated in the mathematical expression. And of course, again, directly the number of inputs that we select into the model has a direct impact on this number in a sort of exponential way. The third model, which I mentioned, is directly connected now to the residual, which is provided from the second PCE modeling, and is the in the domain of statistical pattern recognition concepts, based, let's say, on a strategy where patterns in data can be easily distinguished. There are different categories in the sense of machine learning, let's say, data tools, which are now gaining even more popularity, the unsupervised or supervised methods. So basically, the objective is that we need to detect any presence, identify sources or location of any unfamiliar change in the data samples. And as a result, reduce the false positive or false negative alarms in the data control and processing frameworks. So the three methods which I will present now are the control chart, which is more or less one of the most frequently used tools in this statistical tracking or control of quality processes. It has more local nature in a sense that it's only occupied with the value in the moment, so it doesn't have memory or any cumulative effects with previous past values. So basically, it is not sensitive to very small or sudden changes. On the other side, the Kullback-Leibler or divergence measure, or this group of dissimilarity statistical assessment models, can provide a bit of a better sensitivity. Several methods were tried in this sense, and the one that is maybe the most sensitive in this case was the Kullback-Leibler divergence, and I will show results later on from the implementation. And last but not least is the Mahalanobis distance, which is also quite frequently used outlier analysis methods. So again, from the unsupervised domain of machine learning algorithms. The advantage here is that due to the sorry, I went too far. Due to the covariance matrix, which is inside of the expression that is used to estimate the Mahalanobis distance, it is a very good approach for multivariate data clouds, let's say, because it is not immune to the variance of the variables, and it gives, let's say, also the impact of their correlated variances, and as well the impact of the shape and size of the data, as one can see here from this circled, let's say, chi-squared limits used usually as threshold in this method. So the basic, let's say, or overall framework is first, after a fitted PT Espatarma model and certain model training with enough information for the structure, which is subject of monitoring, to perform tracking of some extract, let's say, diagnostic indicator. And as new data arrives, the idea is to check whether the performance would go beyond or below some threshold values. And of course, is this linked to changes in the environmental and operational parameters, or really a system change and needs to be explored further. The implementation and validation on an actual structure, I had, let's say, a good database of 4 years of monitored operating wind turbine placed near Dortmund in Germany, and it was part of a previous, let's say, research project where big, or let's say extended monitoring system was installed for measuring not only accelerations in several points, but also other parameters. But for this research, we used only the acceleration measurements from one sensor. And again, the SCADA values, which are quite frequently, let's say, not quite frequently, but always there at wind turbine structures, like a default measuring mechanism for the wind velocity, wind direction, the angle of rotation of the nacelle, and the rotor rotation, since it's directly related to the operation of the structure. And then the temperature measurements, which were measured at some 20 meters height of the structure, because it is a long-term monitoring of 4 years, so this was becoming an important parameter here. Some basic data for the structure, and how the steps were accomplished. So first, the response signal, which is measured from the structure, accordingly pre-processed, and then placed as an input parameter in the Espatarma model. Or in the sense of the modeling terminology, let's say this is the modeled output that needs to be obtained with the fitted Espatarma model as a first step. This was done for short 10-minute windows of measured time histories, of course, previously pre-processed, and then this was reproduced for the long data sets of in total 4 years, in a sense that the residuals from the models were fed into the polynomial expansion model, and on the other hand side, the preprocessed SCADA data prepared as 10-minute mean values were fed as well into the model. And of course, the third step with the control charts and the Mahalanobis and Kyle divergence measures was intended to track the residuals in this long-term sense and see if we have some values above or beyond thresholds. So shortly about the Espatarma tuning, which presented the first step of the strategy. What it enables is that we can, in a nice way, let's say, capture the time variability of the dynamics of the structure in these 10-minute intervals. Of course, there is a certain tuning that needs to be done related. Here, I have presented the Bayesian information criterion, which in a sense gives information what modeling controlling parameters selected for the tuning of the model will produce the lowest value of this penalty criterion. And then the lowest value shows the best fit, let's say, for the model. And for example, I have here two 10-minute records on the left and right hand side, where we see the difference in the selection of the residual ratio, which I mentioned previously as a third user-defined parameter. So for example, as we go with the lower value, we arrive to smoother curves of reproduce dynamic properties of the system. Of course, this is not a direct output of the method, of the tuning method, but it's a sort of a controlling visualization through the frozen spectral analysis of the provided Espatarma parameters. So basically, we reproduce the signal itself, but as an indirect step, we can confirm the workings of the method by comparing the identified dynamic parameters with, in the background, a spectrogram. So on the left-hand side, we have, for example, maybe two spiky curves, and on the right-hand side, maybe in some cases, we have two smooth lines. So this was a quite tricky, let's say, step where for a big database of 4 years to provide some optimal tuning that would serve as a good, let's say, model for an automatic identification. Whereas this is just for a comparison when we have a parked structure, which was this short period of time extracted here for the same wind turbine. Of course, we can go to much simpler methods, and as we can see, the natural frequencies of the structure are quite calm and constant during this 10-minute time slot. The polynomial chaos expansion tuning as well was an interesting step. Here, for example, on the graph, I have selected to show, for example, the quantity of detected outliers in input variables. By input, I mean here temperature measurements, RPM of the structure, wind velocity, and so on, and how this number of detected outliers has an effect on the sensitivity of the polynomial chaos expansion model for different orders of the polynomial, which is a user-defined parameters. So basically here, what we can see is that, for example, if I reduce the order, which is more or less also an intuitive notion, the sensitivity is reduced. And for example, the model is not able to react on this growing, let's say, outlier distance of the input variables. Also, the number of input variables is quite important. In the case of this implementation, we applied the complete set of available 5 input variables, meaning the all SCADA variables plus temperature. But for example, if I reduce to 3 via the ICM method, which enables this reduction, for example, we have a model which is really more insensitive to changes, which is logical because we extract maybe important information here. So basically, this is also very important aspect in the tuning. And after everything is, let's say, combined and set for a certain estimation set, we set a validation time in which we test the performance of the model. Here is the PC output in some time scale of a certain validation set. Now the question, before I go on to step 3 of the strategy, is how to, let's say, locate the origin of this disturbances or not good fitness of the model, whether it comes from not good training set, maybe changes in environmental or operational parameters, or an actual damage. So this is the question that we try to find an answer to. So first, the control chart, which I mentioned, was applied with ±3 standard deviations and a mean value of a selected estimation set for the strategy. Then the second one is the Kyle divergence. It was set in a way that it worked cumulatively in a sort of feeding with one data per day and adding up to the validation set. So basically, it's more like a real-time indicator. So this was the concept for the divergence measure. And then the Mahalanobis distance used as a multivariate outlier analysis. So in the data cloud were introduced the input and the output as well of the PCE model. And a sort of diagnostic map was created. In the epsilon axis, we have diagnostic indicator, which is the residual of the PCE model. And then on the x-axis, we have the Mahalanobis distance, which is compiled from big, let's say, data volume consisting of the complete PCE input and output. And then the idea is to set this, let's say, 6 regions and to identify how the results will occur, or in which region they will show themselves, meaning to analyze whether we have false positive alarms, true alarms, or performance within threshold. Of course, when the model is not sensitive to any of this, is what we would say robust performance. So the 2 trial scenarios which I selected for today, one is to see how these 3 measures will alarm when we have effects of a not good training length. And the other scenario would be when for sure we have an information that there is a change in the operating regime of the structure. So this was a good thing that we had, because we are talking about a real structure which is goes into the domain of unsupervised learning. And in that sense, we have no clear, of course, damage scenarios where we can test how these methods will classify the changes, or to provide these labeled groups of data. But in this case, we have a specific change in the operating regime, and we tested how the 3 statistical algorithms will capture this, and if they capture. So the first one is, the first scenario is how a small training length, where we are not incorporating enough of the changing operational or environmental values, can have an effect on the model output. So the red dots here are the outliers which were detected in the SCADA data with simple univariate outlier analysis. So the dashed line here is the limit for the training period, and on the right hand side we have the validation period. This is 1 whole year from datasets from year 2012. So after 2 months of training, then we track the diagnostic indicator for the whole validation period. This here is the control chart, let's say, output. So as we can see, it is quite correlated well with the upcoming values of new data, which is not introduced in the training set. This is the result for the Kyle divergence measure, which again has a nice reaction immediately when it recognizes that new data is arriving to the model in a way. And then the last one, which was the multivariate Mahalanobis distance map, which presents the red dots nicely correlated with the new values of the outliers in the SCADA data, and then some blue dots identified in this region here, which might be a true alarm value or camouflaged false alarm, since we have not a good length of training set. If we introduce now a bigger training length, for example, of 7 months or something until July, I think, yes, 7 months, then we can see on the right-hand side how these measures are very much improved, including the Kyle divergence with the blue line and, of course, the values of the control chart. When on the other side, sorry, yes, this one. So when I speak about the Mahalanobis distance map, we can see that now the potential identified values in region 2 are now not existing, meaning that this can have been a false positive alarm due to not good selection of a training length. The second trial scenario is connected to the scheduled stop test of the wind turbine, and this is identified to be the 5th of October 2012, the marked time slot here for the part structure. What is interesting here, so I took a smaller time scale, just of 4 months or so, because this event was in a short time. So if, for example, I also tried this, use longer time scales here, this was lost in the data, so because it's a very short occurrence. So in order to see how these measures will react, I used only 4 months. So basically, the Kyle divergence has a very good reaction by using 3 months of training length of July, August, and September in the actual date of October is nicely recognized here. On the other hand side, the control chart and the other Mahalanobis distance measures are not so good in this. Maybe here is some information that might be potentially this, but what I tried now is to change the training length, but in another sense. I noticed that, for example, the outliers here in the rotations per minute are not much, as we can see. So the red dots are really few, but again, the control chart here does not produce good values. So what I did is I used data from the following month, for example, November, which has this sort of flat region of RPM values, and introduce this into the training set, just to see if this will contribute to a better performance of the validation set. And so here you can see November, although it's not in a chronological manner, I just entered this artificially, and immediately the control chart as well as the Kyle divergence were performing much better. And again, outliers in the data are not much present, but also in the previous case. So this is not changed as a quantity of new values are not recognized, but this makes a very big change to the model. because supposing we assumed, okay, let's say now this is confirmed, it's a new information, but I will just explain maybe later a little bit more, but the idea is that this is most probably a sensor malfunction. So basically it produces flat values of RPM measurements for even changing wind velocity speeds, and the operation is not stopped or anything, or but the sensor doesn't measure values in a proper manner. This now is changed. So the data here used in this methodology are until 2013, and then there was a bit of a time gap into the measurement system, and now the new data from 2016, this sensor malfunction is let's say eliminated. So basically the results are without these flat regions. Nevertheless, here it was an interesting way to see how this has an effect on the training. And the Mahalanobis distance map, which again, now when we include November in the training leg, produces better identification and clearly identifies the event when the wind turbine has the scheduled stop. So the final idea, let's say, would be this automatization and proper training of the structure, but of course in an autonomous way. So here I present how this would have, let's say, real-time effect. We have certain training length, and then the model is fed with new upcoming data. All the models are activated, and the residual or the diagnostic indicator at the end is produced. And as soon as one of the statistical algorithms shows a value above thresholds, like in this case, for example, it should make a triggering reaction for retraining if it recognizes that it is about changed environmental or operational parameters. And the pink region here in the graph where we have the retraining set is exactly the retraining process. And evidently, in comparison with the upper plot, we have a reduced output here, which is within the threshold values, let's say, or reduced spikes, which are here above threshold values. So basically, the retraining of just 2 months introduced a better output of the model. So the idea is to trigger the proper action and to have a, let's say, a diagnostic indicator which would have the proper sensitivity and in that sense trigger the right action. So this brings me to the conclusions. So basically the beauty of the approach is that it's really a holistic approach, merging information from the structure itself and from its complete operational spectrum. The other thing is that it is, let's say, very easily readaptable to other structures. So this here was implemented on a wind turbine structures, but with minor alterations in the models, or maybe a different type of the same group of models can produce an interesting tool for another structure and to be validated further. Extension of the data-driven model, I would say it's interesting, maybe with a clustering tool further on, just to see with more typical operating regimes of the wind turbine structure and how these patterns will behave with the 3 tools. Improvements in a sense of the maybe of the tuning of the models. The Espatarma now is not very, let's say, performing well for all of the dynamic properties of the structure. So maybe a better tuning here or some introduction that can enable this into the model. Of course, simulation-based design procedures, because we have unsupervised modeling and introduced damages and control scenarios are something that might add an interesting aspect, especially if you want to see how the models will react when we have some damage scenarios, actual damage scenarios. And yeah, I think this circles the main aspects of the conclusions and maybe some future prospects. So thank you very much for the attention and for coming to the seminar.